Well, there is some concern that the Arbery case and Rittenhouse verdict may lead to more instances of citizen policing and vigilantism. Here to discuss is civil rights trial lawyer James DeSimone. Thank you so much for joining us today. So what can we expect to see with the closing arguments of the trial and the killing of Ahmaud Arbery?
I think the closing arguments will really focus on the fact that in this case, the McMichaels and Mr. Bryan were clearly the aggressors with respect to Ahmaud Arbery. You have in the opening statement the prosecutor who's done a great job prosecuting this case. She tipped us off in that she's going to show that these individuals were actually involved in a false arrest and therefore were falsely imprisoning Mr. Arbery by chasing him through the neighborhood and trapping him like a rat, as one of them said. So they don't get really that defense of self-defense because clearly here they were the aggressors towards Mr. Arbery.
So what would you say that, this case and the Kyle Rittenhouse acquittal mean for the future of gun laws? Because that's kind of the next conversation.
Well, you would hope that given the Rittenhouse verdict, that you would have laws that would be passed that would prohibit people from bringing that type of heavy artillery into a volatile situation, such as what was happening in Kenosha. You can make an argument, and indeed the argument was successful in front of a jury, that in the moment that Kyle Rittenhouse shot each of those bullets, he was engaged in an act of self-defense. But why is Mr. Rittenhouse placing himself there? He wasn't defending particular property. He's wandering through a crowd that is hostile towards him and really provoked the situation by his presence with an AR-15. You would hope that cooler minds will prevail, but we have a problem in this country. We have a Supreme Court that is going to be fashioning the abilities of states and municipalities to even pass this type of gun law in order to create a safe environment for people to exercise their First Amendment rights, which we have and which should be protected in this country. And there's currently a case in front of the United States Supreme Court about a New York concealed permit law or concealed carry law that may cut off states like California and New York from prohibiting this type of firearms and injecting them into protests.
So how will these cases influence the public on things like citizen policing? Because when you think about it in that term, it can be very scary and intimidating. Does the government need to step in and address those concerns?
Well, I think so. It should be a very high bar for a citizen to place someone under an arrest. I mean, that will be a theme of the closing arguments of the Arbery case, that just because you have Mr. Arbery in the close proximity to where things were apparently taken, there was nothing tying him to that particular crime. No one observed him steal anything. Let's face it, the only reason he was thought to be the one who was guilty was because of implicit bias and stereotypes that it must have been the black guy who was stealing things. That is wrong. So if we are going to allow citizens arrests in this country, and there is a place for them, you would have to have the citizen actually observe the crime in their presence and call the police at the same time, which is also a great failing in the Arbery case. He didn't call the police. They weren't talking about a citizen's arrest. They were chasing this man down in a pickup truck, a recipe for disaster. And indeed, it was Mr. Arbery who appeared to be defending himself when he thought he had no other choice when confronted with two individuals with shotguns pointed at him.
Right, civil rights trial lawyer James DeSimone, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much for having me this morning.